Car dealership employee kicks out black man, unaware he is the new owner. It was a quiet Tuesday morning just after 9 when Marcus Taylor pulled into the sprawling lot of Taylor Auto Gallery, a luxury dealership tucked in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The early sunlight glinting off the polished surfaces of high-end vehicles as his sleek black Mercedes-Benz EQS glided to a silent stop near the main entrance, unnoticed by staff preoccupied with morning routines. Dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, a slate-blue shirt with a silk silver tie knotted perfectly at the collar, and Italian leather loafers that gleamed like obsidian, Marcus stepped out of the vehicle with the composed air of a man both confident and observant. His posture straight, his gaze sharp, though beneath his calm exterior pulsed the anticipation of returning to the place he had just bought. A place where, until recently, he would never have been welcomed as more than a customer, if that. As the door gently shut behind him, he took a slow breath, eyes scanning the dealership that now bore his name, though no one inside yet knew it, and began a slow, deliberate walk toward the glass-paneled showroom, carrying a slim leather briefcase that held the final documents confirming his full acquisition of the dealership he had purchased in cash. Two young mechanics standing near the service bay exchanged glances as Marcus walked by, one of them pausing mid-sip of coffee to mutter something under his breath while eyeing Marcus up and down. But neither stepped forward to greet him, offer assistance, or even smile, their assumptions already taking shape based on the cut of his skin rather than the cut of his suit. Marcus offered a polite nod in their direction, not expecting much, and proceeded toward the entrance, passing a row of luxury sedans and SUVs lined up in meticulous symmetry, their chrome emblems gleaming in silent testimony to wealth and aspiration. As he entered the building, a subtle shift in atmosphere hit him. Air conditioning hummed overhead, muted jazz played through ceiling speakers, and a heavy scent of leather mixed with synthetic air freshener lingered in the space, where polished tile floors reflected every movement like a mirror. Behind the front reception desk sat a young woman in her 20s, her attention glued to her phone, her manicured fingers flying across the screen as Marcus approached and stopped politely in front of her, waiting. Without looking up, she muttered, "Can I help you with something?" in a tone that balanced disinterest with annoyance. Her voice so disengaged it felt like an interruption to her texting rather than a professional greeting. Marcus smiled warmly, offering a calm, "Good morning, I'm Marcus," choosing not to reveal more yet, curious to observe how she and the rest of the staff interacted with people who didn't announce their titles up front. She finally looked up and, after giving him a once-over that lingered briefly on his brown skin, and then his watch, an understated Patek Philippe, she nodded vaguely and said, "If you're looking for someone, maybe check with sales," before returning to her phone. Suppressing a sigh, Marcus turned and began a slow stroll through the expansive showroom floor, where high-gloss convertibles, sport SUVs, and coupes sat like statues in a silent museum of affluence. Their doors closed, engines silent, each one carefully angled for dramatic effect. Near the lounge area, a teenage boy with his father admired a cherry-red Porsche 911 as a fresh-faced salesman approached, full of energy, already pulling out a brochure, while a few other salespeople sat at desks tapping on iPads or chatting about the game from the night before. One older salesman, heavy-set and balding, appeared to be arguing over the phone with a customer, gesturing with impatience while ignoring a middle-aged couple clearly looking confused as they wandered near the luxury SUV section, pointing at price tags and glancing around for help. Marcus continued walking, now mentally cataloging everything. Staff attentiveness, layout inefficiencies, branding inconsistencies. His mind shifting gears from guest to owner, from observer to reformer. He stopped briefly near the customer lounge, noticing the coffee machine had run out of stir sticks and the cream packets were nearly gone. But no one seemed to notice or care. It was then, just as he was preparing to ask for a general manager, that a tall, middle-aged man approached him from the side with brisk, sharp steps, his navy blazer tight around his chest, his thinning blonde hair slicked back, and his jaw set with the familiar tension of someone used to being in charge. His name tag, gold-plated and prominent, read Brad Sales Manager. And the moment he laid eyes on Marcus, his brow furrowed with barely disguised suspicion, his steps slowing just enough to size him up. "You lost or something?" Brad asked, his voice low, clipped, and sharpened with annoyance, not even bothering to smile or extend a hand. his eyes flicking briefly to Marcus's briefcase as if it were some strange anomaly. Marcus paused, meeting Brad's gaze, and replied in a steady tone, "Just taking a look around." Brad's eyes narrowed further, and his lips curled slightly in what might have passed for a smirk in another context but here felt more like a warning. "Well, this isn't a public gallery," he said with a chuckle that lacked any warmth. "Unless you're planning to buy something, I suggest you head back out before you get in someone's way." The casual condescension in his voice was palpable, and a few nearby staff turned to glance at the interaction, sensing the discomfort but doing nothing to intervene. Marcus kept his tone even, his demeanor calm, replying, "Is that how all potential customers are welcomed here?" Which caused Brad to take a step closer, squaring up like a bouncer rather than a manager. "Let's be real," Brad said. "You're not here to buy anything, and we don't appreciate people just hanging out and scaring off the real clients." The words struck harder than they should have, their racial undertones as sharp as they were familiar, echoing the kind of subtle yet blatant discrimination Marcus had faced more times than he could count. A young black porter nearby shifted awkwardly, clearly hearing the exchange but frozen in place, unsure whether stepping in would help or hurt. Marcus exhaled slowly, resisting the instinctual urge to put Brad in his place right there and then, opting instead for something more measured, more strategic. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a leather folder, embossed with gold lettering, though he didn't yet open it. "You might want to be careful," he said quietly, not with threat but with quiet power. Brad folded his arms, missing, or refusing to acknowledge, the warning. "And you might want to leave," he retorted, "before I call security and have you escorted off the property." Without waiting for a response, he stepped closer again, his hand hovering near Marcus's arm as if daring to touch him, only to think better of it at the last moment. Marcus took a deliberate step back, not in fear, but in silent rejection of the disrespect, and then walked past him toward the hallway that led to the manager's office, noting the stunned looks on a few of the customers who had begun paying attention to the scene. He paused near the entrance of the office, looked back at Brad, and with a calm but firm voice said, "Let's see what happens next," before disappearing behind the door, leaving Brad fuming, unaware that the very man he had tried to kick out was now his boss. Brad stood motionless for a moment outside the manager's office, his eyes locked on the door that had just closed behind Marcus, the casual arrogance in his posture beginning to give way to an undercurrent of irritation masked by pride as he tried to make sense of what he had just experienced, though it never once occurred to him that he might have misjudged the man who had walked so confidently into what Brad still considered his domain. Puffing out his chest and muttering under his breath, he spun on his heel and headed back toward the front of the showroom, shaking his head and chuckling bitterly, dismissing the encounter as just another hustler trying to look important. Another man with big dreams and a cheap suit, though deep down, Brad had noticed the flawless stitching of Marcus's jacket and the quiet luxury of his timepiece, but he refused to let that dent the narrative he had already constructed in his mind. As he passed the receptionist, he mumbled, "Make sure security knows we might have someone wandering into restricted areas." And without making eye contact, she gave a small nod, visibly nervous now, as if she could sense the ground shifting beneath them but didn't yet know in which direction. Back inside the office, Marcus took a deep breath and opened his leather folder on the desk, spreading out the ownership documents, the dealership's financial reports, and a printout of staff rosters, his eyes moving with precision as he scanned each page, his mind already forming a strategy for the changes he would begin implementing after this unexpected encounter. But before he could delve too far into the paperwork, the office door burst open with no knock, no courtesy, just pure presumption, and there stood Brad again, hands on hips, irritation etched into every line of his face. "Look," Brad began, voice low and firm, "I don't know what kind of stunt you think you're pulling, but this office is for management personnel only, not for people looking to play games." Marcus stood slowly, deliberately, the chair sliding back with a gentle scrape as he turned to face Brad, his expression unreadable but calm, like a man used to defusing bombs. "I'm not playing games," Marcus said simply, but that wasn't enough for Brad, who stepped further into the office, now close enough for Marcus to smell the faint traces of cheap aftershave and ego. "Are you some kind of consultant?" Brad asked, voice laced with sarcasm. Another one of those motivational speaker types trying to sell training programs to dealerships? Because if that's the case, you're barking up the wrong tree. We don't do seminars or diversity workshops here. We're a high-volume, high-performance team. Marcus didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch long enough to make Brad uncomfortable. But the sales manager just crossed his arms, mistaking the quiet for weakness instead of strategy. What's in the briefcase? Brad continued, nodding toward the open leather case with a sneer. Pamphlets? Pie charts? Something to help us learn how to talk to people better. He laughed at his own joke, a dry, grating sound that bounced off the glass and tile of the office like a hollow drumbeat. Marcus closed the folder slowly, picked it up, and walked past Brad without a word, brushing against his shoulder as he exited the office, ignoring the shocked looks from staff members nearby who had started to pick up on the tension building like a storm. "Hey!" Brad called out, following Marcus with heavy steps. "You think you can just waltz in here and take over the place? This isn't some community center. It's a premium dealership with standards." Marcus kept walking, past the reception desk, past the sales floor, toward the waiting lounge where a few customers were now fully aware that something strange, and possibly significant, was unfolding before their eyes. One elderly black couple sitting near the finance door watched the scene with quiet discomfort, their brows furrowed in recognition of a dynamic they had seen too many times before, while a young teenage boy pretended to be scrolling through his phone, but was secretly filming the entire exchange with wide, stunned eyes. Marcus stopped near the lounge, turned around, and looked directly at Brad. "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through that door?" he asked, loud enough for the surrounding area to hear. His voice still calm but carrying weight now, cutting through the ambient music like a blade. "Only the ones who think they're something they're not," Brad shot back, chest heaving with indignation, cheeks flushed with anger, entirely unaware of the trap he was walking into with every word. "You people think you can just walk into any room and command respect?" he added, unaware or perhaps unconcerned that several heads turned instantly at the loaded phrase, with even the receptionist stiffening at her desk. Marcus's eyes narrowed, just slightly, but his expression remained composed as he stepped forward, closing the gap between them. "What exactly do you mean by you people?" he asked, his voice soft but icy, every syllable precise. Brad hesitated for the briefest of moments, realizing he may have gone too far but too arrogant to back down. "I mean people who don't belong here," he said. "People who walk in without appointments, without names anyone recognizes, thinking they deserve something just because they dress the part." The silence that followed was loud, an oppressive, crushing stillness filled with judgment and realization as the rest of the dealership fell into an uneasy hush, like a congregation awaiting a sermon. Marcus took another breath, let it out slowly, and then, turning to the receptionist, said, "Please call Lisa Reynolds, the regional director, and tell her Marcus Taylor is on site." The receptionist's eyes widened as the name hit her ears like a slap, and she immediately scrambled for the phone, fumbling with the buttons, her hands trembling. Brad blinked, confused, looking from Marcus to the receptionist and back, something clicking in his mind but not fully forming yet, a shadow of doubt beginning to creep into his certainty. "Wait, what did you say your name was?" he asked, but Marcus ignored him, instead taking a seat on the leather sofa, crossing one leg over the other with the poise of someone who had all the time in the world. The receptionist, still on the phone, whispered something urgently, then nodded, then turned to Marcus and said, "She's on her way. She says she's sorry for the mix-up." Brad's mouth opened, then closed again, his face turning a deeper shade of red as the implications began to dawn on him. A slow-motion train wreck unfolding in his mind. The silence stretched again, this time filled with anticipation, disbelief, and a growing awareness among the staff that they were witnessing something that might end up changing the future of the dealership. A minute later, the sound of fast-approaching heels echoed through the showroom as Lisa Reynolds, immaculate in a navy pantsuit, burst through the front doors, her eyes scanning the room until they found Marcus, and in an instant, her face transformed into one of relief, respect, and apology. "Mr. Taylor," she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow. I'm so sorry we didn't roll out the red carpet. Brad's face drained of all color as he stumbled back a step, eyes darting between Marcus and Lisa as the pieces fell into place, the truth slamming into him like a truck. Lisa approached Marcus, extended a hand, and Marcus stood, shaking it with the ease of a man who had waited years for this moment. Not just to own a dealership, but to expose everything wrong with the one he now controlled. "Let me introduce myself properly," Marcus said finally, turning back to Brad and the watching crowd. "I'm Marcus Taylor, the new owner of this dealership, and I came in today to see how things are run when no one's putting on a show." The silence that followed was absolute. A complete vacuum of noise as Brad stood there, frozen, exposed, stripped of his authority by nothing more than his own words and the truth he had refused to see. The room seemed to contract in that moment, as if the air had been sucked out by the revelation that the man Brad had so arrogantly dismissed was not only someone important, but the most important person in the building, the very owner of the dealership Brad thought he controlled, and the person whose respect he had failed to earn when it mattered most. The realization rippled outward from the epicenter of the confrontation like a stone cast into a still pond, causing every employee within earshot to stiffen, to exchange stunned glances, to reevaluate everything they had just witnessed through a new lens that suddenly made the entire sequence of events feel deeply uncomfortable and painfully revealing. Marcus remained composed, shaking Lisa's hand with the calm grace of a man who had lived through far worse than insults from petty men in overpriced blazers, while Brad stood in place, his arms hanging limp at his sides, his face twitching between embarrassment and disbelief. The look in Lisa's eyes made it clear she already understood what had happened even before Marcus said another word. Her clenched jaw and furrowed brow speaking volumes as she turned and addressed Brad directly, her voice cold as ice. "Brad," she said flatly, "is there a reason Mr. Taylor wasn't properly greeted when he arrived?" Brad's mouth opened, but the words didn't come. His practiced smoothness and faux confidence had deserted him, and now he stammered, grasping for a justification that didn't exist, his voice cracking slightly as he muttered, I didn't know who he was." Marcus let the silence stretch a few beats longer, then walked calmly back to the center of the showroom, placing his briefcase on a nearby display pedestal, opening it with care as if conducting a demonstration, and pulled out the official dealership ownership paperwork, flipping it open and holding it aloft. "For anyone who's unclear," he began, his voice resonating throughout the large glass space, "my name is Marcus Taylor. I finalized the purchase of this dealership 3 weeks ago. I now own 100% of the equity and the property, and I've spent the last several days reviewing everything about how this place has been run, including customer service, community reputation, and staff culture." He paused, letting the words sink in, his eyes sweeping across every face in the room, most of which were now filled with a mixture of shock, guilt, and the dawning understanding that their world had just changed. "Today," Marcus continued, "I decided to visit unannounced, not to catch anyone in the act, but to see how people are treated when no one's watching, when there are no corporate visits or performance reviews looming over your shoulders." His gaze shifted deliberately back to Brad, who now looked 10 years older, his shoulders hunched, his jaw slack, the polished illusion of authority stripped away to reveal the fragile ego beneath. "And what I witnessed was not only disappointing," Marcus said, his voice gaining a sharper edge. "It was unacceptable." Behind him, Lisa nodded grimly, saying nothing but clearly in full support of everything Marcus was laying down. Her own posture one of deference now, a clear signal to everyone else that the power dynamic had permanently shifted. A few feet away, Carla, the young sales associate who had earlier questioned Brad's behavior, stood straighter now, her eyes wide, as if hoping Marcus might have noticed that she had at least tried to speak up. While the receptionist remained rooted to her chair, her earlier apathy turned to rigid dread. "In a few minutes," Marcus went on, "I'll be calling a full staff meeting. We'll discuss what changes are coming, and believe me, there will be many." He closed the folder and set it neatly beside his briefcase, then faced Brad one last time, this time not with anger, but with piercing clarity. "But before we move forward," Marcus said, "I need to address something very directly because it's not just about me being the owner. It's about the assumptions you made the second I walked through those doors." Brad's lips parted again as if to speak, but Marcus raised a hand to silence him, not out of rudeness, but as a reminder that respect is earned, not demanded. You saw a black man in a nice suit, and instead of thinking maybe he's a serious buyer or even maybe I should offer assistance, you defaulted to policing me, questioning me, and ultimately trying to throw me out of my own business. A murmur stirred among the staff, low and uncertain, while customers on the floor glanced at one another, some shifting uncomfortably, others nodding with the grim satisfaction of a long overdue reckoning. You treated me like a threat because of your own biases, Marcus said, stepping closer now, not menacingly, but purposefully. And in doing so, you revealed not just who you are, but what kind of environment has been allowed to fester here under the guise of professionalism. Brad stood rooted to the spot, his eyes no longer defiant, now blinking rapidly as if hoping this was some kind of dream he could wake from. Let me be clear, Marcus said, lowering his voice to a calm yet lethal level. This isn't about revenge. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came here to build something better for the staff, for the customers, and for the community that's been ignored for too long by businesses like this one. Marcus took a breath, scanning the room once more, noting the quiet, the attentive stares, the sea change in posture and perception that came from witnessing truth spoken plainly. But accountability has to come first, he said. And that starts with recognizing what went wrong, who allowed it, and why it can't happen again. For the first time since entering the building, Brad finally spoke without bluster or smugness, just a hollow attempt at damage control. Mr. Taylor, I didn't mean any disrespect. I really didn't know who you were. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't blink, only replied, That's exactly the problem. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with dignity. Another heavy silence followed, broken only by the sound of a car driving past outside, its hum fading as Marcus turned back toward Lisa. Gather the team, he said. We're going to have a real conversation now. As Lisa nodded and began organizing the staff into the central lounge area, Marcus picked up his briefcase again, adjusted his cuffs, and walked to the front of the dealership. Not as a visitor, not as a customer, but as a leader with a purpose, ready to tear down the old walls of discrimination and rebuild something stronger, fairer, and truly professional from the ground up. The staff gathered slowly in the central lounge area, unsure of what to expect but aware that the atmosphere in the dealership had shifted permanently, the casual rhythms of the morning broken by the revelation that Marcus Taylor, calm, composed, and unmistakably in charge, was not just a visitor, not just a wealthy customer, but the new owner of the very business they worked for every day. No one dared speak above a whisper, and even those who typically scoffed at authority now found themselves straightening their shirts, silencing their phones, and watching Marcus with wary eyes as he walked to the front of the room and placed his briefcase on a table beside the espresso machine that had long been more decorative than functional. Marcus took his time before speaking, letting silence command the space, using the moment to look into the eyes of every employee in attendance. Salespeople, service techs, administrative staff, porters, and yes, Brad, who stood in the back with a posture that had gone from dominant to defeated, his gaze fixed somewhere near the carpet as if hoping invisibility might save him. Thank you all for gathering so quickly, Marcus began, his voice even and steady, his tone neither harsh nor indulgent but rooted in something unmistakably firm. I want to make one thing clear right away. This isn't just a meeting to address what happened this morning, though we will talk about it. This is a conversation about where we go from here, about what kind of dealership this is going to become and what kind of people we need to be if we're going to succeed together. He paused briefly, watching how the words landed, observing the subtle reactions. Some employees nodded slowly, some shifted uncomfortably, and a few leaned forward with interest, as if hoping for a fresh start. I know many of you weren't informed that the dealership had been sold, Marcus continued, and that's on the previous ownership group. They made the decision to keep the transition quiet until after the paperwork cleared, but as of 3 weeks ago, Taylor Auto Gallery is under new ownership, mine. A faint murmur passed through the group, a mix of surprise and realization, as the name on the signs outside suddenly took on real meaning. When I made the decision to purchase this business, he said, I wasn't just investing in real estate or luxury cars. I was investing in people, in the belief that this place could be more than just a showroom for expensive vehicles, but a place where customers feel respected, where employees feel empowered, and where excellence isn't just measured in sales numbers but in integrity, service, and inclusion. He turned slightly, glancing at Brad but addressing everyone. This morning I arrived unannounced because I wanted to see how the culture here functions when no one is watching. When a black man walks in alone and doesn't immediately announce his title or net worth, just his presence. The silence that followed was heavy, saturated with the awareness that they had all witnessed something more profound than a simple misunderstanding, more insidious than a lapse in customer service. And what I experienced, Marcus said, was a painful reminder that there's a deep rot in the way we judge people, not based on how they speak or what they bring to the table, but how they look the moment they enter the room. He looked around again, meeting the eyes of younger staffers, older veterans, and support personnel alike. Let me be clear, that ends today. His voice was calm, but its firmness filled the space like a bass line that couldn't be ignored. We will not operate this business on outdated mindsets, discriminatory assumptions, or lazy professionalism. Every single person who walks through those doors, whether they're wearing a three-piece suit or a hoodie, whether they drive up in a Benz or arrive on foot, will be treated with courtesy, with warmth, and with respect. There were a few quiet nods from employees who had clearly been waiting for someone to finally say that out loud, while others avoided eye contact, processing the unspoken accusations being cast upon the culture they had helped normalize. That doesn't mean we're going to lower our standards, Marcus added. On the contrary, I intend to raise them. This dealership is going to become the gold standard in how a luxury business can be welcoming, elite, and community-conscious all at once. Then he walked over to a whiteboard mounted to the wall, uncapped a marker, and wrote 3 words in all caps. Respect, accountability, inclusion. These are not corporate buzzwords, he said. They are non-negotiables. If you're not on board with them, I will personally help you find your next opportunity elsewhere, because this will not be a place where bias masquerades as professionalism, or where leadership hides behind hierarchy to avoid accountability. Brad shifted in the back, finally speaking up in a strained voice. Mr. Taylor, I want to apologize for what happened earlier. I didn't recognize you, and I should have handled the situation differently. Marcus turned to face him, and for a long moment he said nothing, then replied, You didn't need to recognize me. You just needed to respect me. The words landed like a gavel strike, definitive and irreversible, and Brad nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging as he accepted the truth in it. But since we're having this conversation in front of everyone, Marcus continued, I'm not going to single Brad out as the only one who bears responsibility. If any of you witnessed that situation and said nothing, if you've seen it happen before and stayed silent, if you've ever dismissed a customer because they didn't fit your assumptions of wealth or value, then you are part of the problem. No one dared move, the honesty of the moment stripping the room of its corporate facade, forcing everyone to confront their own complicity or courage. This place needs a culture reset, Marcus said, and that starts with leadership, with transparency, and with creating an environment where every employee is not only trained to do their job but empowered to grow, to speak up, and to support each other. He turned again to the whiteboard, this time writing 2 new phrases underneath the first 3 words, internal elevation and community outreach. Starting this week, we will be developing an internal mentorship program, pairing experienced staff with junior employees across departments, with the goal of building real leadership pipelines and improving communication across the board. Murmurs of curiosity and even hope flickered through the room now, as the concept started to take shape in minds long fatigued by routine and staleness. We're also launching a new outreach initiative to engage with underrepresented communities in this city, Marcus continued. This isn't charity, it's strategy. Atlanta is full of car buyers who've been ignored, disrespected, or priced out by dealerships like this one, and we're going to change that by building trust, showing up where it matters, and making this business a beacon instead of a gatekeeper. The shift in the room was almost physical now. Employees straightening, eyes locking in, a sense of momentum building behind Marcus's words. There will be training, he added. Mandatory training, not just on sales or service protocols, but on cultural sensitivity, equity, and how to build relationships beyond first impressions. He let the room sit in that vision for a moment longer, then finally said, "We'll talk more this afternoon, but for now, I want each of you to reflect on what kind of professional you've been, and what kind you want to become under this new leadership." And with that, he stepped away from the front of the room. The meeting concluded, but the transformation just beginning, as every employee was left with no illusion that Taylor Auto Gallery would never again be the same dealership they had walked into that morning.